Please do, and people have already started using this, please do use the chat feature. Say hello to people, announce that you're here, drop in useful links, all that sort of thing. We will keep an eye on the chat feature, but it might be hard if it gets busy to keep a track of questions in there. So if you've got a question, please put it into the Q&A section. And here is a helpful guide to what the Q&A and the chat buttons look like on Zoom. But I'm sure you have all done a lot of Zoom meetings over the recent months. So it's nearly time to get to the bit that you came for. I just want to say a couple more things quickly. So one is I have to acknowledge the huge contribution to the report from Sian's co-author Matthew Gosling. You won't be hearing from him today. He likes to stay in the background, but he really did an awful lot of hard work and was really key to the analysis. And finally, I just want to introduce Sian. Her roots are in digital access and inclusion. She helped create the UK's first public internet access programs in the early 90s, and she co-founded the first Women's Online Resource Centre. She became a data champion following over 25 years working in digital technology and bringing benefits to the non-profit sector. She's co-chief executive of Data Orchard CIC. She leads our work on data maturity in the not-for-profit sector, and she is very good at explaining things. So over to Sian.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming. I'm just going to share my screen, just one moment. Here we go. Can everybody see that okay?
Yes, we can.
Thank you. So I'd just like to start by giving a quick introduction about Data Orchard. We are a social enterprise that specialises in enabling other organisations to get better with data. And our focus is entirely on working with the non-profit sector, essentially the non-commercial sector, so organisations like charities and social enterprises, communities, public sector organisations. And we've been researching data maturity since 2015, so it's great to talk about it, one of our favourite subjects. Today I'm going to talk about what we mean by data maturity, what a data maturity assessment involves, how many and what kinds of organisations have used the tool that we've developed and had out in the world for a while. I'm going to give some big picture findings, and then I'm going to focus in on the 10 key findings that we think are the most interesting ones. So it might be, first of all, quite useful to give a bit of context and background, not least to start with what on earth we mean by data maturity. It's not everybody's most familiar term. For us, the definition we use is an organisation's journey towards improvement and increased capability in using data. And since we're on the subject of definitions, we also define data really broadly. I mean, we're talking about a whole lot. So all of the types of information an organisation collects, stores, analyses, uses, and in all of its myriad forms. So I just thought it would be useful to give a little bit of background also about our journey, actually, and the context for how this work has come about. And I'd like to begin with the epiphany, as I call it. The epiphany was really, and it dates right back probably to around 2010. Many of you may also have been inspired at this time because there was a huge fanfare, lots of media attention around big data, around open data. There was loads of rhetoric about data being the new oil. And for us, there were some really inspiring things happening. So the great Hans Rosling was delivering TED Talks about global health inequalities with incredible interactive data visualizations. We had the Joseph Rowntree Foundation publishing, again, fabulous data visualizations about poverty in the UK. And I think for us, it was a real kind of revelation, a moment of realization that, gosh, if only we could harness all this amazing data in the not-for-profit world, then we could better understand the problems, and we could find better solutions and share data and find better, faster, more sustainable solutions to the world's problems. So in 2013, Data Orchard was created, and there was a group of 8 of us who were statisticians, data-y, researchy kind of people who had a shared passion about the role of data in making the world a better place, socially, environmentally, and economically. And we weren't the only ones, because there was a whole raft of other organisations like the ODI, NPC, DataKind, the OR Society, who were also part of this momentum. We shared that kind of excitement and vision about the world, and I suppose the data for good cause. So in terms of data maturity, we started looking at models in 2015 and discovered there were hundreds of them, data maturity models everywhere, except they were almost all commercially focused. They were primarily aimed at quite technical audiences in very large corporate organizations. And overall, the whole sort of language and context didn't really work for the not-for-profit context where we were working. So we realized we were going to have to create our own. Now, I should say at this time, we were partnering with DataKind UK in sharing this research, and we embarked on a project to really understand the problem space around data, and specifically to try and understand what good and great looked like and how organizations progressed along that journey. So we engaged probably with about 1,500 organizations altogether, but probably more in depth in really looking under the bonnet with about 15 or so. And then there was a big national survey that we did with hundreds of organizations. So between it all, we managed to get a real feel for what that journey looks like. And so in 2017, we published our first social sector data maturity framework, and we published our first UK research on data in the not-for-profit sector. And we were very excited by that. We had some fabulous feedback. People told us that they were using it in their organizations and found it helpful. But quite a lot of people came back to us and said, well, that's all very well as a sort of theoretical model, but what questions should we be asking ourselves? And of course, this really chimed with us at Data Orchard, because through the process of the research, we had been exploring how you measure, how you score, how you benchmark one organization against another. So with the help of a grant from Stanford University, from their Digital Impact Program, and later on from the Esme Fairbairn Foundation and also CAST, we embarked on the next phase via quick whistle-stop tour via the first National Data for Good conference, where we started testing out some interest in our initial findings on the research. We went on to launch in October 2019 the first online interactive data maturity assessment tool. And at the same time, we published a new version of the framework. So, and following that, we actually launched a more advanced version, a sort of customizable version, which was aimed at engaging multiple people in an organization and had some flexibility to be customized. So we also had conducted our first impact assessment in 2020. It was just really thrilling, because it really assured us that our tool was being used and very positively received, but also primarily it was being used as a learning tool and as a catalyst for action. So that was really positive for us. And so here we are today, talking about the state of the sector research and what all the data says about that. So context again, what is the data maturity framework? This is really a simplified model of all of that complexity of all that data in all the ways it gets used in an organization. And what we identified were 5 stages of development, from unaware, emerging, learning, developing through to mastering, and 7 really important key themes that are important if you want to grow in maturity. Now, a couple of those themes are quite obvious, like the data and the tools. A couple of them are very much about purpose, so how you use data and how you analyze it. And most of them, 3 of them, are about people. So skills, culture, and leadership are all about people. And it's the combination of all of those that are important in data maturity. So when we came to convert our sort of model and our theory into assessment tool, getting the questions right was really important. And so we devised an online assessment, which has been tested relentlessly. Many of you may come from organizations that were part of that process of testing and trying it out with different users. And thank you if you were. Essentially, the data maturity assessment explores those 7 themes and sub-themes within those 7 themes through an online questionnaire. And it's not just an assessment. I think this is what we're really excited to learn, is that it's a data maturity assessment is a process. It's a process of engagement within organizations. As I say, its primary impact is on learning and creating a shared language, a shared thinking and understanding about how to think about data in your organizations. It's also an output, and I'll show you in a moment the kind of report that the tool generates. But critically, it's the start of a journey. So by going through the process of taking the assessment, people start to think about the problems and the opportunities to improve in their organization. And very often, the data maturity assessment is an opportunity to baseline where you are so that you know where you're going. And indeed, we've had quite a number come back and implement changes and come back and reassess to measure their progress. So this is what happens. You take an assessment, it takes around 20 minutes to complete. The report that you get will tell you how you're overall what stage you're at on the 5-stage journey. This organization in this example is not doing very well. They're just at the emerging stage. It gives them a score against each of the 7 themes. It will point out where the strongest areas are and identify which are the weaker areas for the organization. And then you can drill in further to all of the 7 themes, and it will give you a little bit more information about how you're doing compared to the benchmark group. It will suggest where you are now and what the next stage might look like. So the idea is that it's breaking down the whole journey into some baby steps of what you need to focus on and what the next step might be within that. So I guess we should talk a little bit about the data maturity assessment tool. So how many have used it? I'm focusing, I should say, on the data we have from October 2019 when we launched until December last year. We were very excited. We had 2,119 users. Whoa, that's amazing. But then, because we're quite pedantic about data cleaning and data quality, we went through a process of cleaning and validation and matching. So as I said earlier, the tool is designed for multiple people. So we're trying to get an organization view. So where there are multiple responses from the same organization, we have to group them together. So that gave us 630 respondents from 249 unique organizations. Next round of cleaning, let's exclude the commercial organizations. We are, after all, focusing on the not-for-profit sector. So that gave us 572 respondents from 202 organizations. And then just to add another level of complexity, actually, there is a full version of the assessment and a taster version, which is a shorter version aimed for people with very little interest and very little time for data. Mostly when we're talking in this presentation, we're talking about those that have taken the full assessment. However, when we're touching on questions that the taster involves as well, we're reporting on all of that. Let's not waste the valid responses from valid nonprofits. So just a quick profile of those kinds of organizations. As you would hope, it's primarily UK-based organizations, and it is primarily not-for-profits, which one would hope, because that is the audience for which the tool was designed. You can see by the chart on the right that compares the number of organisations by turnover, notably quite a lot of unknown in there. Where we do know the turnover of organisations, they tend to be on the larger side, although quite a lot with a turnover of less than $1 million. I should say that it could be that some of those on lower income organisations could be amongst those that were excluded if we weren't able to validate their organisation or their email address to an organisation. Also, we're interested in what kinds of not-for-profit organisations are using the tool, and there's a really wide range. I think this is similar to the kind of data that we get from national infrastructure organisations in terms of profile of the sector, very diverse, a lot in social service areas, health and education, but also grant making, law and advocacy, international development housing, they're all in there. So it's being used by a really wide range of organisations, and that's quite thrilling for us because we've tried to make it as universally applicable as possible to the sector in all of its glorious diversity. So, drum roll time. What does it actually say about how data mature the sector is? Ding, ding, ding. Oh, it's not a single answer, I'm afraid. But focusing on those 133 organisations, you'll recall the 5-stage journey. What this is telling us really is that most are in the learning stage. And overall, edging into developing, it's really exciting that there are about a third in there in that developing stage. About a third of organisations are in there. Only one mastering in that data set so far, but that hopefully will change in the future. And about 1 in 5 is lagging behind in the emerging. I should point out that we didn't have any in the unaware category. I suspect, given that it is a sort of self-directed process to take a data maturity assessment, that those who have no interest in data are very unlikely to take a data maturity assessment. Just looking at the strengths and weaknesses, not really very much in it. They're all in the learning stage across those themes. I think it's clear that the strongest areas appear to be in data and culture. The weakest are in leadership and skills, and everything else sits in between. Now, some of you may want to know if there's much difference between the sectors. So we did take a look at that for comparing the sectors. Obviously, we've got different numbers from different sectors, but again, not very much in it. Everybody's learning, whatever the sector. Of course, in every sector, there are leaders and laggers. And I would like to point out the sort of meaninglessness of averages. This is a beautiful dot plot produced by Matthew, where each dot is an individual organisation's score for a theme. And you can see there's just a huge amount of variation. You know, I think in every sector there will be, as I say, leaders and laggers, and each organisation has its own individual strengths and weaknesses. So the bit we've all been waiting for, let's get on with the 10 key findings. So coming in at number 1 is the cost of data. The cost of data is huge, hidden, and often wasted. We've found that the level of resource, even if you exclude the cost of tools, is pretty consistently around 40 to 50% of staff time across a whole organisation. It's hidden because it's embedded to varying degrees in almost every role. So you can see from this slide, you know, you would expect the top 3 there to be, as you would expect, people who work in data management and analysis roles, obviously, they're going to be doing a lot with data, and also impact and evaluation and finance. But we have found that having a dedicated data lead is quite rare, but on the increase. And it's particularly rare in a small organisation. So small organisations, typically everyone does 10 jobs anyway, and wears lots of hats, and they're very unlikely to have data as their part of their job title. But I think the point on this really is it's a huge resource that gets put in, and it's largely wasted because for all of that effort, most organisations are not really reaping the rewards and benefits of data maturity. The second key point is leadership. Most leaders don't see the value of data. Positively, and I would regard myself as an optimist here, there are about 5% of leaders who really understand data and understand how to use it to improve what their organisation does and prioritize it and really drive the questions and are influenced by it. That's really exciting to me. It's also encouraging that there are around a third more, 1 in 3, that are engaged and supported as leaders. However, on the downside, over half have yet to be convinced of its value. And that is, for me, quite a surprising finding, given considering that they're sort of spending half the salary bill, typically your biggest expense in most organisations, on data. Number 3, data quality. Now, data quality, this is perhaps an area that may relate to why leaders have so little value in data, because actually only 9% of organisations are telling us that they're really confident about the quality of their data. And well over half disagree or are neutral about whether their data is complete and accurate and up to date. I think there are some interesting other questions around data quality in our research as well. One of the things that really stands out for me is that 1 in 3 organisations say they don't collect the right data, and about 1 in 5 don't know the quality of their data. So this is a real concern. And it's true that data quality is really hard and it's really time consuming. It's something you have to keep working at all the time. So, I mean, refer to my earlier slide on the data cleaning process we went through just on this report. It can be endless. And so I would say this is where the analogy with data being the new oil kind of really fails. And I would say it's much more along the lines of data being more like an orchard. You know, you need people who are caring and nurturing for your data and nourishing it. So I can write a blog post about that one day as well. Number 4, a lot of data is still on paper. So while ostensibly we live in this amazing digital age, a lot of the not-for-profit sector data is collected and stored on paper. And its use in the sector is really widespread. Now, it may be necessary. Much of the sector works with some of the most disadvantaged and marginalized people in society, and that may well include people who are digitally excluded or sick or elderly, or contexts where it may just not be appropriate to collect data digitally. So we have dug a little bit deeper around this and around asked organisations, do you collect data digitally where possible? And in most cases, people say yes, but there are still probably around 30% who don't collect data digitally when potentially they could. And less than half are saying that they're collecting data consistently in consistent and efficient ways. So I think all of this sets out a strong argument for digital maturity. We have a little bit of a toing and froing between the data maturity and the digital maturity models and contexts, and I'm really enjoying that kind of dialogue. I think the truth is that from a data perspective, you can't really analyze data very well when it's on paper, so it has to be digitized at some point really to be of much use. Continuing along the digital maturity theme, let's have a little look at tools. This slide, don't be too overwhelmed. I know it's a bit of a base. This is a stacked bar chart, and it's presenting data around 5 broad types of tool. So the darker the colouring, then the more people agree on the left. The lighter the colouring, the more people disagree, which is to the right. Now, I suppose this is a slight provocation to the products market, because it seems from our research that there are lots of digital tools in use. But the problem is most organizations don't seem to think they're very good. And it seems also that there's much more success at getting data into systems than there is at getting useful and meaningful information out of those systems. I think I should say here that, I mean, probably around 2/3 of organizations are using some kind of database or CRM system, and finance software is also pretty commonly used. But at the more advanced end, I would say the research shows that there's much less use of more sophisticated tools. So only about 15% are using any kind of data science type tools. And overall, spreadsheets are primary. They're everywhere. Everyone is using spreadsheets, and there's still quite a lot of manual counting going on. Which brings me to the next slide, because counting altogether is a bit of a theme as well. So we asked organizations to tell us about the different ways that they analyze data in their organizations. The biggest area by far is around counting and kind of more historic and descriptive things. So there's a lot of routine capturing and recording of what organizations do, primarily for reporting to managers, boards, funders, regulators. There's less of the more challenging kind of uses of data around things like evidencing needs and problems, understanding characteristics of users, and critically measuring impact. And alongside that, there's much less of the kind of deep and meaningful analysis around exploring the whys and the how come kind of analysis in data. And even less so when it comes to the even more sophisticated versions around prescriptive and predictive analytics. I would say it's not necessarily a linear journey for organizations to traverse this space, but it's interesting that there's quite a lot in this predictive analytics. I suspect quite a lot of that may be to do with cash flow forecasting, which of course is an essential for any small organization, well, any organization, large or small indeed. Number 7. This is all about culture. And what we found is only a fairly small proportion, like a third maybe, are culturally open, really culturally open to questioning and challenging practices. And I think data culture is something really hard to do. For us, when we explore this theme in the assessment, we're looking at kind of balancing 2 sides. So part of it is about openness and sharing with data, and part of it is the counter of that, which is protecting and security. And it's the combination of those two that are important. I think what's interesting here is that culture came out as one of the highest scoring themes. And I think that's positive because the sector is actually quite good at data sharing, quite culturally open to it on the whole, internally and even externally. Plus, we have had, not so long ago, in 2018, the new data protection legislation. So that will have caused quite a lot of attention to the security and protection side of things. Number 8 is, despite all of that GDPR data protection work, some are still quite vulnerable around data protection and security. Positively, a good proportion, 72%, tend to agree that their policies and practices are robust around ensuring data is safeguarded, but probably around 20 to 30% overall are kind of legally and reputationally exposed in this realm. Around more than 1 in 3 don't know how to respond to a data breach. 20 to 30% are not storing their data centrally and securely, and 1 in 5 don't think that their policies and practices are robust. So work still to be done for some. And then number 9, inefficiencies. I'd like to talk about this both at a sort of macro level and more specifically at a micro level, really. Again, another beautiful Matthew Gosling stacked bar chart. I think just to sort of explain again, this is an extent bar chart where to the left in the stronger dark pink are those who extensively are benefiting, and to the right are those who are not so much, not at all. And the overall picture there, I think, is that somewhere between a half and 2/3 are not seeing even moderate benefits around a whole range of potential areas of reward in their organisation. And then specifically in the bottom row here around efficiency savings, there's still a really poor use of data for improving efficiencies. And in fact, if you compare that with some of the earlier findings around how data is collected, for example, only 39% are saying they collect data in consistent and efficient ways. Less than half have say they've got rich and versatile data that they can use and reuse for different internal and external stakeholders. And of course, there's lots and lots of manual, arduous processing of data. So that's probably what's taking up a very large proportion of that 40 to 50% of staff time. So number 10, last and possibly most important in my book, the lack of skills, responsibility and support. This was, as you may recall, the joint weakest theme alongside leadership in the overall findings. It tells us that over half don't feel that they've got the right skills and capabilities to maximise use of data in their organisations. And that's interestingly, I don't know if I've missed Pauline yet, but it's not just about specialist skills in data roles, but also about general data literacy in an organisation. And majorly, it's a real skills gap in leadership. So, and I think this is an interesting one as well, because less than half are telling us that they even understand what their skills and capabilities needs are. And it is quite surprising because it's quite a broad range of skills in different perspectives. The second key point around this is about responsibility. So actually very few organisations have got clear responsibility for managing and organising their data and driving their organisation's data maturity forward, although I'm very encouraged by the number of new heads of data and data strategists that are getting in touch. But in many organisations, that role, even if it's part of somebody's job, has not been identified, and that's an important factor to consider here. And finally, lack of external expertise. It's discouraging that there are I know there are lots of us working to support the sector, but only 31% told us that they have access to support and advice around data from experts that they trust. So that is a worry. It is a huge field. I feel it's really important to keep learning and keep talking. It's really hard for any of us to keep up with this revolutionary, fast changing world around data. I'm going to stop talking there and say thank you for listening and invite you to share your questions.
Okay, thank you very much. There's been quite a lively discussion in the chat, and we might touch on that in a moment. And several people have put questions in the Q&A. Please, we've got about, I would say, 10 to 15 minutes questions if we need them. We will definitely finish by 1 at the latest. So I'm going to work down the questions from the top. So the current most popular question is from Martin Howitt. He says he knows the tool is aimed at non-profits, but it clearly has applications in the commercial sector, and many commercial SMEs have similar issues to charities as far as data management is concerned. Are there any plans to expand the use and reporting into that sector?
Thank you, Martin. Yes and no. We have had a surprising level of interest from commercial organisations with the same perspective. We are in the process of bizarrely creating the tool to be more sector agnostic. It's not changing fundamentally, but we have tweaked some of the language, and in its next incarnation will be imperceptibly different for people working in the non-profit sector, but it will be applicable and possible for consultants to use in the private sector as well. And we are running an event next month to specifically focus on an agency version or reseller version for other providers of support in all kinds of sectors. So yes, do get in touch and come along to that event.
Excellent. There's a couple of questions I might try and group together, but the one that's currently at the top, I'm very excited by, because this is the question I always ask you when you show me the dot plots. It's from Paul Titcher, and he says, on the dot plot chart, are organizations typically all at the same stage for each of the 7 themes, or can an organization be brilliant at one thing and terrible at something else? Okay,
thank you. It's different. The story is different for every organization. It's rare. They'll usually have some strengths and some weaknesses, and it's rare for them to extend more than 2 stages between. It's very rare to have one that's like at mastery in one area and completely unaware in another, but they might vary by 1 or 2 stages in different areas. We've been doing some interesting work recently with cohorts and comparing their starting points. What I'm curious about, and I'm really interested to see if the data supports this, is as they focus on improvement, that they get more kind of equal and rounded. If you look at a radar chart, I'll have to throw some of those at you the next time, but you know, that they move from quite a kind of differing picture to a more consistent picture in how they're progressing. Does that answer the question?
Well, you decide whether it's answered the question as well. There's a couple that are from anonymous attendees. Can't tell, obviously, if it's the same anonymous attendee. I'm going to try and link them together. So they're really about how would you support an organization that's at such an early stage in their data journey they struggle to comprehend the framework or get their foot onto a ladder? And also, can you make any recommendations for organizations generally, how they should get the best out of using the assessment tool?
I think it's really, I mean, I think it would be hard to get to an organization that was completely disinterested in data, but assuming that they have some interest in improving in data. And I think we've seen, particularly through this pandemic, a real realization among organizations of the importance of it, especially when they couldn't get into their offices, to their filing cabinets where all the data on their beneficiaries were. I would always say start where an organization's at. And sometimes it's about, you know, usually when we work more intimately with organizations, it's a combination of using the assessment tool to start the conversation. And it's very much about setting goals that are realistic and not too advanced, starting where they are, and often around quite routine practices with their data. So I could recommend, for example, Inspiring Impact have got some fabulous resources. You know, you're not going to jump to doing artificial intelligence and machine learning when your starting point is that you've got lots of really poor data on paper forms in your filing cabinet. So I think it's really about helping the organisation to understand where their needs and where their priorities are in their context where they work. A lot of small organisations tell us they take the data maturity assessment together as a small group, and that in itself helps them to start the conversations about what's most important to them. It helps if they have sometimes an external facilitator, but often organisations can at least begin the conversation themselves. What was the second part of the question there? Did I?
No, that was it. Yeah, that covered it, I think.
Okay.
So I'm interested in the answer to this one. There's been a bit of there's a question here, and it relates to some discussion in the chat. So the question is, how can we improve the choice and agency charities have about what data is collected and how they get to use it? Charities are often subject to strong external demands linked to funding. And in the chat, there's been some examples of organizations that are collecting data from service users, but that's the data that they're kind of told to collect because of the what should organizations do to try and open up their ability to collect data that's useful to them?
Yeah, I very much share that concern. I think there's a huge amount of people feeling beaten by data, like some kind of stick that's beating them from that externally, and that it's something that's done to them by their board, done to them by their funders, done to them by regulators, and often it takes up so much of their energy to respond that they have nothing left to give for their own sort of self-reflection. I think I aspire to a world of empowered organizations. I'm a great advocate of theory of change and impact measurement and I suppose this comes to the questioning and challenging your organization and the culture as well. So I always feel like that's a really important process. There's sort of in terms of the purpose and the direction of the organization and how it measures the difference it makes. I think that helps to set a vision beyond the just running in the hamster wheel, filling out data on what you're doing. I think also leadership is important in terms of understanding what are the most important questions you're asking about your organization and its sustainability. And it will include finance and HR type data as well, but also how you're spending your resources, what you're working on, and how you report that. I think there's a question here for funders as well, in terms of what data they're requesting from organizations and the relationship between that. So even in very small organizations, there's a huge amount of complexity in the way work gets funded. And so small organizations are having to report different data to different funders, and many of whom have different expectations, different outcomes, different beneficiaries or parts of organizations they fund. I think there's an opportunity for some really important dialogue about that as a relationship and as a process, especially if the funder doesn't then use the data, which I've heard rumor that nothing happens to it, that these organizations are working 40-50% of their time to give out data that nobody cares about or uses. And I think that questioning of what the data gets used for and how people act on it is really important. And I did hear a term, it's a little bit rude, but in the States at a conference, the Data on Purpose conference, where they had a lot of philanthropists and funders there, there was a woman, Queen Janae, who said, "Don't be an asshole," which I thought was a really slightly rude, but actually quite an important term about funders asking for things that they don't need. So I think making it sort of proportionate and important and valuable should be the focus.
Okay, we're coming towards the end of our time. I can see 4 questions left in the Q&A. Let's try and let's make these quick fire. Let's make this a quick fire round.
Okay.
So the first is Kate White. This is very straightforward. Will you be sharing some of the results sliced and diced, e.g. by size of organization?
Oh, well, I haven't got plans immediately to do that, but that will be an interesting area to delve into. As ever, I have fantasies of an interactive dashboard with all the findings being shared in the world. And that's on my ambitions list, but not in the short term.
Okay, we could be quicker on this quick fire round.
Okay, I'm trying my best.
Anonymous attendee said something nice about the tool and asked, was it designed for organizations based outside the UK or with UK organizations?
Well, interestingly, designed for UK, but we've had a huge amount of interest from outside the UK. We're exploring, other language versions within and without the UK.
Okay, that's good. That was very quick fire. Paul Titcher says, have we done any work with schools? Staggered by the extent to which data is a key management tool, especially in secondaries.
We haven't directly as a company in Data Orchard, although my co-chief executive, Madeline, may have some views on this, since she's also chair of a primary school of governors. I think some schools have used it, but I haven't been involved in terms of more detailed support with them.
Okay, and the last one is a bit more of a discursive one, so this will be our final question. Is there a cultural, ethical issue here in the social sector? Do traditional social sector leaders find it difficult to differentiate from data exploitation? Is it taboo to certain demographic of leader?
I don't know the answer to that one. I think ethics is responsibility and ethics are a major issue. There are a whole realm of work, I think, led actually by Oxfam internationally. There's a lot of focus around responsible use of data. I think it's more that organizations, most of the organizations that I have come across who are driving forward data strategy are quite conscious around some of the issues like ethics, and particularly, if you think groups like Parkinson's UK, for example, there's a lot of research ethics going on anyway in that world. I think it is really important. I don't know is the answer in terms of a demographic of leaders. I could be aware of that. I think there is a style of leadership that is perhaps not as open and culturally inclusive within the whole organization as others. And I think for me, it's that dialogue and collaboration within the organization that's most important in driving it forward. So if the leader is part of the stick beating for more KPIs and more data and not using that very ethically, that is a problem. Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm just trying to work out how to put up our final slide, because this is all we have time for. How do I make that? I don't ever use PowerPoint. There we go. Sharing is not paused. Oh, it was all going seamlessly until it came back to me. Right. So we're about to finish. Thank you so much for coming and engaging in the conversation and asking really interesting questions. And we hope that we'll keep in touch with you. I imagine we'll be writing a blog to kind of summarize some of this discussion, which will be out fairly soon. Not within hours, but maybe within days. We'll be publishing a video of this webinar out there. We're also running some more smaller free events, which are aimed at different sectors within the social sector, so leaders or agencies or support organizations. So do have a look at that and sign up for that. Do make use of our free data maturity assessment tool, and please encourage others to do that. We're really from a personal point of view, one of the great things about working for a social enterprise is we are mission driven. We want people to get better at using data, and it's really good that tool is there. And thanks once again to Matthew and to Sian for writing the report, and to Sian for giving us a really clear talk through, and to everybody for coming and attending this webinar. I think that's it.